first. So let's talk about you and let's talk about your journey on YouTube. So tell everyone first the majority of the things you cover.
All right. So I started my channel 2.5 years ago. And at the time, I can talk about this later. At the time, I was an English professor. And so I started the YouTube channel because I didn't know what I wanted to really do with it, but I was interested in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard situation. And so at that point, we were about a year out from the trial. And so I started covering that, definitely Team Johnny. And I would say about 3 weeks after I started that channel and started covering the Depp stuff, the Marilyn Manson scandal broke. And so you had that day in February 2021 when Evan Rachel Wood and a bunch of other women came out online at the same time in a kind of coordinated hit against him. And so I started covering that because I thought that was interesting. And he's Johnny Depp's best friend. I don't know if people know that or not. And so I started covering that. And then I just kind of, I guess you could say I sort of acquired a reputation as a kind of a culture warrior for falsely accused men falsely accused of Me Too scandals, infractions. But I do other stuff on my channel. I have philosophy videos, I have film analysis, and so it's not something that I intended to do, but that's what it's evolved to be. And of course, there are so many Me Too scandals now.
It seems to be an epidemic.
Yeah, so I mean, it's working for me. I guess I'll just, as long as there are false accusations and Me Too scandals, then I'll be making the videos.
Hold off on the Tony. Actually, read that one, but after this, guys, we're going to hold off on the $20. We will read the $20 super chats after this portion. Go for it.
Tony Guevara just said, "Read."
There it is. There it is. Oh, I'm gonna like it. I forgot. I can like the super chats now. I keep forgetting you can do that now, which is just weird.
So we covered Johnny Depp when the trial was going on. It was only like an hour away from here, actually, in Fairfax County.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, since we're sympathetic to Johnny Depp's side of the issue, it's more interesting to ask you, like, why are you Team Johnny?
So I could give you a number of reasons, but for me, and I think for the majority of Johnny Depp supporters, it comes down to those leaked audio tapes between him and Amber Heard. And they ended up being entered into trial. So if people watch the trial, they might remember this. But there were conversations that were taped between Amber and Johnny. Apparently they would record their conversations because they were having difficulty like in figuring out who said what. I mean, we all understand that, right?
Oh, so this wasn't surreptitious
No,
recording.
She knew it was being recorded. She knew.
That makes it even crazier.
It is. It's crazy because
I didn't know that.
Yes.
They were told to do this by what? Like a couples therapist or something?
Yes, it was a part of their therapy.
Between that and Jonah Hill, these therapists are just ruining everybody's lives.
Right?
These therapists don't know what they're doing.
If your relationship's on the rocks, maybe don't go to couples therapy.
Okay, maybe it's just LA therapists, right? Like they've got such an abundance of clients out there that they just tell them whatever they need to tell them. So you were covering Johnny Depp,
right?
And then of all of these cases, which one do you think is obviously the Johnny Depp one? I think is the biggest right now.
Right.
What is the most shocking revelation that you've seen from one of these cases?
Well, I think that the Marilyn Manson case, I know it's complicated for people because of his public image, and there are a lot of people who are like, I'm not into that, not into him. But when you actually dig into it and look at what has happened to him and the hoax, the levels to which Evan Rachel Wood and her co-conspirators went to frame him, it's astounding. So I think probably the most astounding aspect of the Manson case is the fact that Evan Rachel Wood and her girlfriend at the time and co-conspirator faked an FBI letter. They actually typed up a fake FBI letter for her to enter into a custody dispute that she was having with the actor Jamie Bell. So there's a whole dimension to this Manson stuff that actually is not even really related to Manson. She also was basically trying to withhold Jamie Bell's son from him, and of course she recently lost custody of her child.
And still tried to like turn the narrative on that in the media.
Tried to say it was Manson's fault.
She's on the run from Marilyn Manson's secret agents in Nashville.
That's right. That is right. And so to me, and so anyway, so she and her girlfriend typed up this fake FBI letter to give it to Jamie Bell, her baby daddy, in order to explain to Jamie Bell why he couldn't see his son, because she was part of an investigation, an FBI investigation into Marilyn Manson. Insane. And so they had to hide out from Marilyn Manson. And so this was all exposed in court, in the court custody hearings, and Jamie Bell recently gained full custody of the kid. But this is just one example of craziness.
I want to ask you to do your best devil's advocate for both Amber Heard and Evan Rachel Wood.
Oh no.
Also, before we do that, I want to point out, like, Marilyn Manson without the makeup now looks like a kindly aunt. So I'm half joking. There's a funny picture of it. It's a meme, but it's like the idea that you're on the run from Marilyn Manson is ridiculous.
It is, well, it is ridiculous in a number of ways. And, it was beyond that. She was claiming that she had to get bulletproof glass in her house, and she had to there was one article where it talked about how she'd hired a Navy SEAL to to protect her.
Wow.
So
do you want the devil's advocate?
Devil's advocate.
Start with Amber Heard.
Okay, I'm looking forward to losing a bunch of my subscribers when I do this. Let's see.
Like, maybe what's the worst evidence against Johnny?
Okay, so some of the texts that Johnny Depp sent to Paul Bettany, the actor Paul Bettany, a mutual friend of his, after he found out, basically after all this shit had gone down with Amber Heard and the relationship was falling apart, and he found out Amber Heard was, cheating with Elon Musk, etc. He wrote some rather, harsh, unsavory texts where he made a Monty Python reference to burning Amber. Let's set her on fire. Let's burn her. And it was a Monty Python reference if you look at the context of it. But he talked about, he described her as a flappy fish market. So there's some unsavory texts for sure.
Sure, but that's not evidence of abuse. So, like, is there any evidence in that case? And I am not nearly as well versed in it as you are. Is there any evidence in that case that Johnny was abusive, or that maybe there was some mutual abuse going on?
Mutuality. Well, so there are therapist notes from Amber Heard's therapist indicating that Amber Heard had told her that there was mutual violence in the relationship, some mutuality. And so, but again, when you go to a therapist, they only know what you're telling them.
They only know your side of the story.
We're getting it from her perspective. And, she's a diagnosed borderline personality disorder sufferer. And this is not even something that she's contesting. This is something that came out in her therapy. And so one of the hallmarks of that disorder is that they have a very skewed perspective on things.
Everything's black and white.
Yeah, everything's black and white, and everything, there's a lot of projection, and there's a lot of turning around and blowing things up out of proportion. On one of the audio tapes between her and Johnny when they get into a fight, at one point you hear her on the audio saying, "Johnny, stop hitting me, stop. And then a little bit later, he's like, "I'm not," and then he says, "I'm not hitting you." And she goes, "Yeah, but when you put me in this position where you talk to me this way and you make me feel this way, it's like you're throwing me up against a wall and stuff." And so you see that she actually translates emotional outrage into physical violence in her mind. Like that's, and so I think with her, we get a lot of lies, but I also think we just get a lot of really distorted projection.
I thought the worst evidence against Johnny was the letters that he would write Amber after they got in a fight. And he was like, I'm sorry for acting like a monster. He acted like he had this alter ego who was a monster who was like at fault for their altercations. But I don't know.
Yeah, so he never admitted to any kind of violence, but there are these kinds of sort of these questionable references sometimes in their conversations about the monster. Now, he claimed in court that he would use that term to try to appease her, that he realized that the only way that he could make peace with her when they had one of these fights was to kind of concede whatever she was saying. And he has conceded that he has had a big addiction problem. And so that's probably one of the legitimate, I guess, beefs that she had with him in the relationship, is that he was drinking too much. Of course, she had her own issues as well. But no, there's just not any evidence to suggest that Johnny Depp hurt that woman. And like I said, if you ever listen to the audio, what is on the audio is her admitting that she hits him. There's an audio where he says, when it gets violent, when it seems like it's going to get violent, we have got to separate. There cannot be any violence. There cannot be any hitting. And she basically just starts berating him and making fun of him. And she says, "Oh, I was just hitting you like this. I wasn't using my fist. I was just hitting you." And so we have her on tape admitting to violence.
Like, I was just hitting you. I wasn't punching you.
I wasn't punching you. Exactly.
Right. Well, I mean, but we have to accept we're never going to know the actual truth of what happened.
Sure.
And that wasn't even the point of the trial, was to find out who was in the wrong in their abuse. It was about defamation.
Well,
at the end of the day.
the defamation claim, the defamatory claims that she made were about abuse, they were about physical abuse.
And
so
it has to prove her knowingly lying about it. And I don't know if she does know. I think she's actually so unhinged that she might legitimately believe herself to be the victim of violence.
I think that if I just had to guess what's going on in her mind, I don't think that she necessarily thinks that he actually physically abused her. But what I think is going on, and this is common once again with people who have this psychological disorder, is that she interprets emotional outrage. So if he's angry or if he says things to her that she doesn't like, she interprets that almost as a kind of a violence. And so I think what was going on with her is she thought, well, he was emotionally abusive to me. So
do you think
it's
that
like
there
physical
was
violence.
emotional abuse?
I think that there was definitely toxicity, but it's hard in these situations to unravel. Do I think that Johnny Depp at times said some awful things to her? Yes. I mean, you can even occasionally you can hear it on one or two of the audios, particularly one when they're drunk. But I've been in relationships like that before. When you're with someone who has a personality disorder, is very narcissistic, someone who's deceiving. I mean, she was cheating on him repeatedly in that relationship, having Elon Musk up to their penthouse when he was out of town. And so I think that in such situations like that, sure, there's a kind of a toxicity that develops. You're not going to speak to someone nicely all the time in that situation. But I really do think that this is one of these actual hoaxes. I think this is actually an example of a real hoax.
Do you think Elon Musk is the father of her child?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. So one of the things that's come out over the last several years, and this came out in court as well, is that Amber Heard's sister had told a mutual friend of theirs, a woman named Jennifer Howell, that Amber and Elon were involved in a fight over the fate of these embryos that they had frozen.
Sounds like something Elon would be in a fight over.
It does sound like it,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Of course, we know he likes to spread his seed, so I don't find that hard to believe.
Wait, wasn't she with James Franco too?
She was.
Yes.
She was.
She
yeah.
also brought him up to
The penthouse.
The penthouse,
Yeah,
yes.
That hotel,
She-
that penthouse elevator has seen a lot of
It
people.
has seen a lot of
in the
action.
camera.
Cara Delevingne.
Yep.
As
She
well.
seemed to really not even be attracted to Johnny Depp. She
called
would
him a
tell
fat old man.
Yeah, he's like this fat old man and she like has this perceived leverage in the relationship because she's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that comment was very telling. Okay, now devil's advocate, Evan Rachel Wood.
Well, I think the thing that is most compelling to a lot of people who assume Manson is guilty is the autobiography of his from the late 90s.
Okay.
So his autobiography, it's called The Long Hard Road Out of Hell. It's a play on one of his songs. And it was co-written by a guy named Neil Strauss. Now, you might know Neil Strauss from another book that he wrote called The Game, about how to pick up women.
Yes.
Yes. This is a nice little book, right? And so this autobiography, it has a number of stories in it that definitely paint Manson in a disturbing light, a deranged light. And so this is something that people cite quite often. Now, the problem is with that view is that there have been numerous claims in that book that have been debunked, not even related to this situation, but stories that Manson and Strauss told in the book that witnesses have come forward and said that this absolutely didn't happen. And they even admit in the book, there's a disclaimer in the book that it's fictional.
It's autofiction, not autobiography.
Exactly. And so, and even in that book.
But why would he write fictional stories that make him look bad?
Well, because the time was so different. So
Yeah, it was a way different
I don't know
world
how
at
old
that
you are. No
time.
offense. I'm 42 years old, and I remember those days. I was a teenager back then, and it was just a different time. Definitely we didn't have Me Too. We didn't have this sort of sensitivity about these types of issues, and it was seen as being very edgy. And you have to remember that Marilyn Manson, he established himself. He broke into the music industry on the basis not only of his music, but on the basis of shock value.
Yes.
In fact, he was sponsored, so to speak, by Nine Inch Nails, Trent Reznor's record label, Nothing Records, and Trent Reznor helped to produce his successful album, Antichrist Superstar, and then the previous one, his breakthrough record. And so it was just a different time. I was telling my viewers the other day that I remember going into a CD store as a teenager, and you would seek out the CDs with the parental advisory label, because that just had this sort of cachet about it, like, ooh, and you would look for the most disturbing, covers, and it was a different time. And so I think that Manson and Neil Strauss really wanted to present him as this very edgy guy, and the book was very well received. And in fact, it received rave reviews. The critics loved it. They said it was like a classic work of literature. Some even compared it to a great classic. And it worked for him. That worked for him, and that image worked for him.
Can you give an
decades.
example of one of the stories in it that made him look so terrible?
So there's a story, kind of all run together, but there's a story, I believe, something to do with pissing on someone, pissing on a woman, I believe.
Like consensually or not?
I'm not going to claim that I remember exactly, but it was.
Or was there even like such a concept of that at the time?
I don't think that the book claims that they held her down and did this to her, but it's not. I mean, there aren't stories in the book about what we would consider to be outright abuse or anything that Evan Rachel Wood or these women are accusing him of. It's just stuff that makes him look like, at times, like he might have some misogynistic impulses toward women.
Yeah. I think that a lot of the Me Too stuff, it, at least in part, comes from the cultural shift to like not judging a book based on its cover. And if you did judge a book based on its cover, like judging Marilyn Manson based on his public image and how he presents himself, then you would probably assume he's not the most stable person in a relationship. Yeah, you would assume he's guilty,
right? Yeah.
Not necessarily that he's even guilty, but that he's just not the best type of person to get into a relationship with, period. And it kind of clouds your judgment if you put those concerns aside.
And I have said before on my channel that I recognize that there is a certain, I don't want to use the word karma, but there's a certain cause and effect relationship here between the image that he cultivated so assiduously and promoted for decades. Like when you go around giving people the impression that you are a monster, then I don't know if he would agree that that's how he thinks he promoted himself, but when you give people that impression, then, and all the, the satanic and all of that, and saying, and saying things like when he and Evan Rachel Wood broke up, he cut himself 140 times and stuff like that, which he said in an interview. He says a lot of stuff. He has said a lot of stuff for shock value. And what's happened is that it worked for him very well for decades, and it's just come to a screeching halt, like the wave, just kind of like you're riding the wave of the culture. And what you're doing, it's working. It's like, oh, I'm surfing, I'm edgy. People think that this is interesting. They're buying my stuff. They're talking about me. And then all of a sudden that wave hits Me Too, and it's just crash. Right.
And it was already we were already well past the time period in which that was the case du jour, right? Like it's I always kind of compared to professional wrestling, when at a time back then, much like a Marilyn Manson, like you're your character in a lot of ways. You're not Brian Warner, you're Marilyn Manson, which is not the same thing as the world now, because now social media gives people instant access to you. You are now yourself. Right. You are not the character you played in just like, who is the band? Milli Vanilli. But I'm saying, like, you were a product sold by a record label, and that was, and their job was to sell you on something that was satanic and dangerous and all of these things.
Subversive,
and like I said, that book works well to cement that image.
Oh, the book was hugely popular. And like I said, critics at the time were not complaining about the questionable narratives, the questionable stories in that book, or the quote unquote misogynistic tales in the book. They thought it was all great. It's gritty. It's funny. Wow. And
it was such a different time.
It was so different. Like, it's hard to explain.
It is. It's like, it's the same things happening now with the women from the Playboy Mansion who are claiming, who act like the culture wasn't what it was at the time, that it was all very
and they had
bad.
No idea.
Yeah. It was a very different time in the world back then. And it's hard to communicate just how different the relation. I would almost say that society afforded women the more agency at that time than they do now.
And that was the response to the Crystal Hefner story. She's coming out with her autobiography.
Oh, great. I can't wait.
That I loved. It said, like, women are very willing to be complicit or active in evil until the very moment where it becomes no longer strategic for them. And that's what it seems
Well,
to
I'm
be
glad
in
she
that
could concede
situation.
that, actually.
No, she didn't say that. That was just
I was like, that sounds pretty smart for Crystal
someone
Hefner.
responding to the story. But yeah, she's like, I'm gonna, reveal the secret toxicity of the Playboy Mansion. It's not really a secret.
Right. And what I find, I've watched that Hefner series, and look, to be fair, there are a couple of things that are discussed in that series that I thought were pretty damning. Particularly, it looks like Hefner looked the other way on the Cosby stuff. Bill Cosby would go to the mansion and he would do some shitty stuff, or maybe even drug women and have sex with them. And it does kind of seem like Hefner was looking the other way on that. But I would say probably 95% of what we see in that Secrets of Playboy documentary, it was fully consensual behavior that is just now being reframed differently. And I'll give you a great example. The two twins, the Shannon twins that are interviewed in that series, when they were with Hefner, they were very happy to be on the show. It made them stars. They loved dressing in the skimpy clothing and going to the clubs. Well, now they claim that they were coercively controlled, basically emotionally manipulated. And if you look at what they wear now, they all wear the same Me Too activist outfit. It's like a Quaker look. Like they've got this, it has to be
Handmaid's Tale.
buttoned up. Yeah, Handmaid's Tale. It has to be buttoned up all the way. It's black and white. You see the same
The
thing.
pussy bow blouse thing.
Similar to that. Yeah. If you look up, if you look up the Shannon twins and their interview with Secrets of Playboy, it's a ridiculous outfit. It's black and white. It's like a Quaker outfit.
They're the nutty ones, right? Who like
They are
fights
nutty.
with each other, and
Is that kind of how Amber Heard dressed in court?
Well, yeah. So you see that in court. You see also Evan Rachel Wood when she spoke before the California Assembly, because part of her whole shtick is that like activism, getting laws passed and all of that, right? When she spoke before the California Assembly, she wore a button-up Quaker looking outfit, black and white, buttoned up all the way. It's just very obvious.
Okay. Is there a Me Too story where you initially thought it was a hoax, but you looked into it and you found out it was true?
Well, we were just talking about this off air. I won't go as far as to say that I think it's true, but initially I was pro Andrew Tate because I thought, okay, here we go again. It's another one of these hoaxes. And I have not investigated it thoroughly, and I don't want to say that he's guilty. He may be innocent, but I will say that the more that I have looked into him a bit, the more I see, I don't think this is someone that I really want to defend. And I could be wrong on that. I don't want to alienate
And
the
you're
Andrew
as
Tate
skeptical
voters,
as they come. Yeah, so I believe you have a fair take on it. And also, you mentioned you were an English professor. I assume you're no longer. How did you make your career move?
Yeah, I think I ended my academic career when I started the YouTube channel. I'm pretty sure. No, I mean that's not why, but it would be very hard for me now to have an academic career with academia being as woke as it is in light of the videos that I put out. So my story is that I grew up in a very religious Southern Baptist, East Texas conservative family, and that had a lot of great aspects to it. But there were some things about it I didn't like, a kind of repressiveness, I think. And so when I went to college and when I went to graduate school, I really went more to the left, and because I thought, okay, now I can get away from all of that repressive, orthodox, narrow-minded stuff that I thought that I hated so much. And what happened was, so I went to grad school, got my PhD in English and film, and through that process, I saw that basically I thought these people are crazy. It was all this woke stuff. We didn't have that word. We didn't use that word back then, but it was all of this woke ideology, basically trans ideology, a lot of the stuff that we're now seeing actually in society. It germinated in academia. And what's interesting is that when all of this started in academia, it was really just a thought exercise. So I would go to class. I would go to a feminist theory class in grad school, and we would sit around and we'd talk about there's no such thing as a woman. Biology doesn't matter. And I'd kind of sit there and I'd be like, yeah, I mean, I guess if you look at it this way, I guess you could say that. Yeah, okay. But it's like a thought exercise. Mm-hmm. But what's happened is now it's actually been taken seriously, and it's gotten into the culture. And all of these young people who have gone through this indoctrination in college, and it's happening even now at the level of high school and elementary school, they've gone through this indoctrination and they're taking it seriously. They didn't realize that their elders were just kind of, fucking around. Can I say that? Sorry.
Yeah, it's right.
We're kind of just screwing around with ideas. And so they're taking it seriously, and now they're implementing it. And it really is a kind of like a sort of a woke children of the corn situation, where the kids have turned on the adults and they're sort of holding us all hostage in a way.
Mao's China.
Exactly. So anyway, long story short, I did become an English professor. I was a lecturer for a number of years, and I became totally disillusioned, totally disenchanted with the far left and with that particular orthodoxy. And so now I describe myself, as someone who's center, maybe slightly center right. But yeah, that was my journey. And so I started the YouTube channel right after COVID. And as it turns out, I ended up being let go from my job. I wasn't fired because of the channel, but they let like 7 or 8 people go in the wake of like restructuring and stuff. And so it was very synchronistic, because at the same time that chapter of my life was closing, then the YouTube channel was emerging. So
awesome. That's very fortuitous, right? That it worked out that way. One of the better examples, I'll just mention this before we move on, of if we wanted to explain, we've talked about this, Mary, if you want to explain like how different it was back then, and you want an idea of where the veil comes from, is to look at how Paris Hilton portrays herself now, where she basically talks about how everything that she was, her image as being a bimbo, as being this or that, really was a veil for something much deeper and darker. Right. But at the time, it was just the way the culture was. And you could actually say that her decision to promote that worldview runs headlong into what we see now, because it was very, very normal at the time. That was fine. But now she basically says, no, it was a bad thing, but I was coerced. To do it.
Yep.
And that's...
well, did she say she was coerced to have
that it was an aspect of trauma, and that a lot of it was because she was doing the show, and she had the creepy story about the teacher who came to her house, and...
about her, experience in the
but she wants to take it back now.
Teen industry.
But she wants to take it back now, and she wants to pretend. And a lot of times when they do that, they're not willing to admit that. Look, you profited.
I don't like when the finger is pointed at the public for believing the lie that you were selling them.
Exactly. They want to. They're making money on both ends, right? It's one of my biggest critiques of a lot of this, and I try to be very calm and not rude when I say it. It's like, look, when I see Lily Rose Depp making the songs that she's making now and making stuff she's making now, that's fine.
Right.
But I don't want to hear in 20 years that, I didn't want to make this song. No, I didn't want to do this. No,
it was Sam Levinson's fault because I was a 23-year-old teenage girl.
You're an adult. You're an adult. She's 18. She's in her 20s.
20.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, she's
very sophisticated.
An adult.
And a very sophisticated. Yes, exactly. Very worldly. Yes.
You're an adult, and I need people like that. Like I said, I feel that women in the early 2000s were afforded far more agency than society wants to give them now.
Absolutely, and that's one of my problems, my big problems with this emerging narrative about Me Too and coercion. I'm definitely, I think that obviously there were some aspects of Me Too that were needed and healthy, and I think Weinstein was guilty and all of that, right? All those disclaimers. But I think that this is really a kind of regression for women, because what people don't realize is that you cannot have absolute 100% freedom and 100% safety at the same time. Actually, safety and freedom are generally mutually exclusive. So the further you go down on the safety scale, then the more repression of freedom you're going to have. And I don't think people understand, especially younger people, that one of the things that the feminists of old were trying to get away from was this infantilized idea of a wide-eyed, innocent woman who's easily manipulated by more sophisticated men, and that this is a scary world. We can't let our daughters, freely party or have sex or associate with whomever they want because they are infantile. And so I don't think that people understand that what is happening now with these trends in society as relating to feminism, gender, and Me Too is that we are seeing, I think, unfortunately, a kind of not only sexual regression, but a kind of infantilization of women that ultimately will not be good for women either. And so I'm definitely of the Camille Paglia school of thought when it comes to feminism. I believe in women's rights. I don't have children. I'm not legally married. I'm not some traditional stay-at-home person. But I just don't believe this stuff is good for society.
Yep. Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.